So who are we? Well, we're a group of senior academics, different disciplines, and we share an interest in healing and would like to know more about it. And we think there should be the development of an interdisciplinary research subject, really, perhaps called healing studies, to take it forward, which we think needs to be led by humanities rather than science, because science doesn't really believe in healing. And we believe it matters, and that healthcare, where I come from, needs to be more open to it. So I'm also going to just briefly tell you why I myself am working on healing. I'm a doctor by trade, and doctors think it's all woo-woo nonsense, really. But there are two reasons. One is personal experiences. So I was healed at the age of 16 after a bad accident, and I had a healing experience again in my 60s. And I've had other experiences of what people might call spiritual events, or the ineffable or noetic experiences, which make you aware of a different dimension to the world. And secondly, I did a lot of research on placebos some years ago. I was an arthritis doctor, and placebo is the best treatment we have for arthritis by quite some distance. The biomedical explanations, which are all about suggestibility and conditioning, just don't make any sense. And I could not live with the approach that it's all in the patient's brain and they're just being suggestible. I thought something else was going on that we might call healing, or we might not, depends how you want to use words, really. So that's why I'm doing it. And I want to see medicine take it seriously. So I'm going to do briefly 3 topics. What is healing, healers and what they do, and does it work? And then Aisha and Natalie will say something more sensible. So what is healing? Well, it's a tricky word, really, because it's applied to people, the environment, increasingly the planet, many other things, and we use it in various different ways. People are wanting to come in, so we'll just allow that. We use it as a noun, an adjective, or a verb, so it's a very tricky word to deal with. The derivation, the Old English derivation, is wholeness. But if you look at current definitions and dictionaries and so on, they'll largely relate it to things like wound closure. In other words, the biomedical usage of the concept of healing. So unhappy with that, we decided that we'd ask members of the public what they thought healing was. Now, if you do that and you say to people, well, what's healing? They'll sort of mumble, fractures getting better or something. They can't really cope. But we used another technique which allowed them to cope. So this is what we did. In public places, a variety, some in Exeter, some not. We asked random members of the public for 5 minutes of their time for a research project. We gave them some crayons and a bit of paper and said that we wanted them to draw the first image that came into their head when we posed a question. And we didn't say what the question was going to be, and that we would like to record them talking about the drawing as they did it. And people largely said yes. A few refused, of course, but people largely said yes. Then we posed the question, prompted them to talk about what they were drawing as they drew it, perhaps asked some questions. And we consented them after the procedure, not before, to get the written consent. This was all ethically approved, but we did that to avoid priming. And again, people seemed largely happy with that. And we've done this with over 100 people over a period of years. And the question was, what does the word healing mean to you? And what happened was really interesting, because people would often start drawing while they'd say something like, I don't know what this drawing is, I don't know why they've got this image. And then after a while they might say, oh, well, now I understand what this image is about. As if it was accessing some aspect of their understanding that they couldn't access simply verbally when asked a question or when thinking it through. So it's a very interesting technique, I think, for getting at people's understanding of the world. I recommend the methodology to those of you who are interested in methodology. Here's an example. This is a chap who I spoke to, well-dressed middle-aged man, and he took his pencils and he said, well, I seem to be drawing a blanket. I don't know why a blanket? And the blanket's inside a room, but then so are the trees and the sun, and they're all in a room. And then he said, I have no idea what that's about, but that's the image that popped into my head. And he went on his way. And I felt like saying, well, I could tell you what it's about, sunshine, but I didn't. So very interesting things like that, but that's a fairly unusual image. We had much more common themes and images amongst them all. So some of them were healthcare related. Nurse comforting my dying mother in that picture. But most weren't health related. So growth and development were common themes. Love was a common theme. I'm very fond of that picture, which was drawn by a 14-year-old girl who just came up with it just straight off the top of her head as the idea of hands healing with love. And she has got an image of a heart there, as you can see, hopefully. And heart images were very common from lots of people. The concept of energy was also quite common, sometimes coming from the sun. This is an image of someone that said it was all about energy from outside coming into the person to allow healing. And there were lots of images of nature and nature scenes, such as this one. And that's a rather interesting nature scene one that sadly we didn't get any recorded data on what the person who drew this was trying to draw or trying to say. But I just love the image of the stethoscope on the tree with the bird in the tree. And wholeness, suns or circles were another common type of image. And we did some qualitative analysis of all this stuff. Well, I didn't, I can't do anything clever like that, but others did. And there were three major themes that emerged. One was that healing comes from some external force, usually expressed as energy. Second was that healing is brought about by other people, healers, who allow you to heal. And the third was that healing comes from within, that healing is self-healing, that we all have the ability to self-heal. But people often combined these three themes into one idea of what healing was, so that they thought about external energy being channeled by healers to allow self-healing to occur. And this is just random members of the public in the UK, in the southwest UK predominantly actually. And it's just such a very, very different concept from what we hear from my profession of medicine or scientists. This is just out with the materialistic paradigm that we live in. So what is healing? I don't know, but those are some views of what healing is. So the second topic I want to think about is healers and what they do. I've been privileged to work with healers and healing organizations for a while now. It's estimated that there are about 30,000 healers practicing in this country, which isn't much lower number than the number of GPs. A lot of them practice under the radar because they don't like the ridicule they get for calling themselves healers. And a lot of them do it for love, not for money. And they self-identify in a variety of ways. Some just like to be known as healers without anything else. Quite a lot in this country call themselves energy healers, Reiki healers, spiritual healers, crystal healers, shamanic healers, and indeed many others. And quite a few of the people I've spoken to and worked with are sort of a mixture of those. So Reiki healers who use crystals, or spiritual healers who use shamanic methods. So there's lots of mix-ups of different forms and concepts of what they're doing. And what they do, what do they actually do when they're healing? Well, it's extremely variable, so there's no simple answer to that. What I've been impressed by is that most of them prepare very carefully for any healing encounter. They will often spend a lot of time, perhaps in a trance-like state in some cases, and they'll prepare the space they're going to be in, they'll prepare what they wear. They often talk about cleaning the space and getting rid of negative energy. So they spend a lot of time preparing. Most of them have some form of ritual that they've developed that they follow. The rituals vary very considerably. Some use hands-on, a lot don't choose hands-on. And they mostly believe that they're conduits to healing activity, that it's not them themselves, but somehow they're channels to allow healing. And most, I would think, believe that this channeling involves something outside. They use a variety of different metaphors for what that something else is. Some spiritual healers will often invoke the concept of God, but it's much more common for them to invoke some concept of energy, which accords with a lot of the thinking of ancient healing traditions and indeed Chinese traditional medicine. And I've interviewed a lot of these people, formal interviews, and after the first set of interviews, I sort of concluded that the key to what they were doing was focused attention with good intention. And I've sort of nuanced that a bit since, with the help of my colleagues here, that it's really about love. And it's unconditional love for another. And the 5 of us who were on the title slide recently did publish a paper about that concept. We have published a lot of this other work, actually, including the pictures work. So the third thing, briefly, is, does it work? Ridiculous question. I can't tell you how stupid a question this is. I'd love to give a talk on why this is such a stupid question and just leave it at that, but that's not what we're doing today. But it's the question that my medical and scientific colleagues always ask me, and it's the question that they ask about any intervention, be it homeopathy, which they say doesn't work, or a vaccine, which they say does. And it is just bonkers, isn't it? Because it's a totally context-free, dichotomized question, yes or no. If no, we think homeopathy no, so we'll reject that. If yes, we think vaccines yes, everybody must have a vaccine. This is just bonkers stuff. I mean, I can't really cope with why we're going on with this approach. Does it work? I just saw some papers through in your library about does it work? Huh. You're doing it as well. And of course, in my profession, they expect the answer to that question to come from randomized trials rather than anything else which might be experiential or a different way of knowing. So as far as science is concerned, there's only one way of knowing the answer to does it work, and that's a randomized trial. Well, what's the answer? The answer is yes, however you want to look at it. There are lots of randomized trials and meta-analyses that show positive effects of healing. And of course, that doesn't make people believe in it, but that's how it is. And if you prefer the experiential approach, of course, there are numerous testimonies since the beginning of time. And I'm a living example of one of those testimonies. So it works. If that's, Kenny, how things? Is my voice going?
No, just in case you want something.
Got gin in it?
I'm not sure.
So it works. And then what they say is, well, it must just be a placebo. And I've put the just in inverted commas because it's a term of dismissal. It's belittling it, just a placebo. It's just about suggestion. Nonsense. So is healing just a placebo? Well, the theories of placebo, as I mentioned briefly before, nobody will remember this, but are about suggestion and conditioning largely. So it's just in your brain and it's largely nonsense. So it assumes a brain. So is healing just a placebo? Well, it's not actually, because if you look at some meta-analyses of healing, such as the one by Chris Rowe in this country, you find that healing works not just on humans and animals, but it works rather better actually on plants, in vitro preparations, seeds, and even in enzymes in culture. So unless you believe they have a brain, or perhaps they do, perhaps if you're a panpsychist like me, you believe consciousness is everywhere, but within our current concepts, you just can't cope with that. can't be placebo if it works on plants, can it? So it's not just placebo in the way we use that term commonly. And it's at that stage, really, when I talk about this to colleagues, that they just start going, la, 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 they can't cope. The cognitive dissonance is just too great. This is completely impossible. It's impossible that healing intention can work on a plant or make a seed grow faster. So they just go la, la, la and give up. Unless they themselves have experienced healing or some other spiritual experience, which of course many have, but they don't admit that in public. When I've talked about, I have sort of come out over recent years, and it is a bit like coming out. It's been quite exciting, and it's felt quite dangerous to go to medical meetings and talk about healing. And, you know, I get rubbished. But then people creep up afterwards and say, you know, I think you might be right. And they sort of look around carefully to make sure nobody's listening. And when they admit they themselves have had some experience or some other reason to believe in healing. But it does produce this great cognitive dissonance with the way we think about our world at the moment. If you still don't want to believe this, am I doing on
10 minutes.
time? Okay, I'm all right on time. If you still don't want to believe this, I invite you to do an experiment yourselves, which I've done and many other people have done, which is to make cress grow faster by being nice to it. And you know, cress grows very quickly, so it's an experiment that's fairly easy to do. You set up two identical dishes, bowls, whatever you want to do, and you plant the cress in exactly the same conditions, and you treat them in exactly the same way, except you're nice to one preparation and you're not nice to the other one. You can talk out loud if you like, but it's generally regarded as a thought experiment. And it works. So the king is right when he talks to his plants. Gets a lot of rubbish for that, doesn't he? But there we are. So healing works however you want to look at it, really. And when you get down to it with the king or the cress experiment or my being healed as a teenager, healing's really about personal stories and experiences. It's not really about the way we live in our scientific materialistic paradigm that's so extraordinarily dominant at the moment. It's about who we are. It's about our experience of the world and the way we have reacted to those experiences, I think. And these stories tell me certainly that healing is real and important, whatever medicine and science might have to say. This is a part of our reality on this earth. And it's one that I think we should take a lot of notice of right now, because boy, do we need healing, not only of individuals, but of the rest of the mess the human race has got itself into. And that's why we as a group are quite passionate about this. And that's why we as a group are grateful for the opportunity to share some of our thoughts about it with you and hopefully get some feedback. So I'm going to stop now and with the chairman's permission, pass over to Aisha and Natalie. Some of you will know Aisha, probably nobody knows Natalie, but hopefully they can tell us briefly who they are. So, Aisha, you there?
Hi, I'm here.
There you are, Aisha. Hi.
See me. Okay, thanks very much. So I'm Aisha Nathu, and I have been an affiliate of the Centre for a long time. I'm a medical humanities scholar. And hello to those of you I know and to those I don't. So I'm just going to follow on very briefly from what Paul has said to just bring us back to biomedicine and clinical encounters, because these two sort of traditions are going on as if they have like nothing to do with each other, as if you've got these like spiritual healers and Reiki healers and shaman, whoever it is, of group of healers. Paul has done a lot of work with them. And then you've got serious scientific biomedical practitioners. And where can they connect, and how can they connect, and should they connect? So, I mean, my real question is, what is it? What can biomedical professionals learn from this more holistic kind of healing, these holistic healing encounters? And this is a really important question, because our society, our day-to-day lives are structured around a very rigid system. Situations I've had when I've seen a GP or other professionals and I've talked about anything outside the box, I'm generally given answers such either totally dismissive or that's not what I do. And that answer's really sort of stuck with me for a long time, as in, why not? Why isn't it what you do? Isn't it all healing? Don't we all have some kind of common aim here? So I want to sort of pose a question of what is lost really in this kind of now normal process of decontextualization. So real decontextualization that we have within biomedical encounters, where the patient is totally fragmented into not only a collection of parts, of body parts, and this is something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. I've done my PhD research on organ transplantation, and the body literally being seen as just this collection of parts, and that's what the patient is. But also separate, the body being separate from the mind, separate from the soul, and separate from the person's entire context, like their past and their present social context, their families, their communities, everything. It's completely irrelevant in our sort of normal medical encounters. Also, I want to think about the doctor-patient relationship and how doctor and patient are also seen as these completely separate entities that are in a sense of interchangeable. So you could have any patient presenting with the same symptom, a pain in the stomach or whatever it is, and it really doesn't matter who that patient is, because the advice, I mean, it could be done by AI, really, is going to be the same. So the patient is interchangeable with any other patient. And so is the doctor, because they're trained in the same way, and their advice, if they're doing a good job, should be to give the same advice, given the evidence, given the symptoms and so on. So it shouldn't matter whether you see one doctor or another. And this is often the case. Like if you have an appointment, a consultant appointment, you may or may not know who you're going to see, and you may or may not see that person. You might see the registrar, you might see somebody else, but it shouldn't make a difference, because that's seen as just not a relevant question to say that there's some connection between the doctor and the patient. When actually that is all important, and that's certainly what we find in a lot of these healing encounters with more holistic healers. That the same diagnosis and prognosis is not generally assumed, regardless of who is treating and who's being treated. And a lot is in there in this relationship. And in biomedicine, it's often very hierarchical. It's often very time pressed. And this makes a real difference to the sort of the healing outcomes. And with practitioners who have much more time, a lot is done in that time, the kind of building up of, what Paul described as unconditional love or anything like that, or the grounding of the practitioner. They might need to ground themselves and prepare and practice. All of this takes time, and then a connection is built up between the practitioner and the patient, or the healer and the healee, or whatever you want to call it. So my hope is that with our work, we're trying to build up research from across disciplines, where that's like our key aim, to sort of bring the humanities into this. Is not just a scientific question. We want to hear people's opinions and research from across the domains. We want to take seriously practitioners who are outside of the biomedical professionals, but we also want to include them and really just sort of find out how we can learn from each other and how we can heal. Okay. Over to you, Natalie.
Tell us who you are, Nafti, while we're working.
Okay, I'll just give you a brief. I'm a scientist by trade. I am a neurobiologist, actually, evolutionary neurobiologist. And then I became sorely disillusioned with science to provide any of the answers that I needed on any of the answers to my big questions. So I headed off into the realm of homeopathy, and I actually became a homeopath. So I'm just going to share my screen with you now, so we can get into my slides. Okay. Right, does that work for everybody? Is that okay? Yes. Okay, fine. So yeah, so I'm kind of at the moment, I'm interested in healing journeys. And I just wanted to give you a flavor of what's going through my mind as a scientist and a homeopath. So I love these two quotes from Rumi. And I think it kind of summarizes what I'm going to try and say to you today. So I'm a scientist. I'm also a homeopath. And the move from being a scientist to being a homeopath was really, really difficult. I had to learn how to think in a completely different way. And that kind of informed me, I think, and informed how I think now, because now I'm kind of heading off into philosophy and ethics, strangely. I don't know how that's happened, but anyway. So we seem to have two approaches to how we apprehend our world. And this is something we're all aware of, and Paul's been talking about it. It's sort of the cognitive, analytical, objective, quantitative way. And then you've got the experiential, contextual, subjective, more kind of qualitative way of looking at the world. And in myself, I've been trying to reconcile these two. Is there a tension? Are they complementary? Can we integrate them? And I've also been looking at lots of analytical tools, conceptual tools that philosophy provides, that homeopathy has provided to me. And I apply them to healing. And now, what I'm going to talk to you now, the paper that I'm trying to write, is about the journey or healing journeys. So to my mind, and what's come through some of the discussions with Paul and our group, is that healing is about making whole. It's also about managing pain and about relieving suffering. So the questions are, what is whole, and how do we manage and relieve? With what aim? And the journey has actually become a popular metaphor. It's a metaphor that's been used by integrative medicine, but it's also used and mostly used in the alternative medical world. So you can approach the journey biomedically, and the biomedical approach is mostly through a battle. They talk about a battle, the battle to return. And if you're going to have a battle, then you need an enemy, you need a goal, you need protection, you need weapons, and you need this kind of grim courage to get through it. There is a cost to this battle. There's damage, there's wounding, there's destruction, there's sometimes death, but the goal is survival. But in most cases, it's actually about dominance. It's about killing the enemy, destroying the enemy. So the aim is a kind of normalization or a restoration with an end to suffering. So getting back to what you were before you were ill, or normalizing your blood counts, or, you know, having two legs, or a brain that functions in a certain normal way. And this is, and it's all about control, being objective, purposeful. It's dependent on identifying the enemy, but it's also dependent on having total knowledge of the situation. And that is essentially what medical research is about. I've been in medical research for many years, so I know that. But there is an alternative approach, and it's about the journey onwards. And in this, the concepts of trust, of faith, of surrender. The cost is the surrendering of control and total knowledge, or the illusion of that, because we can never have complete control and we can never have total knowledge. And the goal, well, I don't know. What is the goal? Is it about self-development? Is it about, maybe it's about transformation with relief from or transcendence of the suffering? So we're going into the unknown. There's no specific goal. How do we do this? Do we do this with a kind of vigilance, or do we do this with a complete surrender? So then the idea of fear comes into this. And illness is a threat. It's a change in circumstances. And it's a fear of an unknown future. And I've read a lot about this. Harvey Carell has written a lot about it in her work, where she's explored her own illness. And this means if we're going to face fear, then we have to have a kind of courage. But does that mean a battle courage or an unknown horizon courage? And this is where Paul Tillich's book, The Courage to Be, is really, really worth reading. I'd recommend it. I think he wrote it in the 50s. It's a fantastic book. So we're looking at a journey of either restoration or a journey of transformation. Now, transformation has been associated with the spiritual path, with creativity, with meaning, but you need a kind of courage and a kind of resilience in order to go through that. And this reminds me, I've just been to see Moon Age Daydream. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's a fantastic film about David Bowie. And this is a wonderful quote from him about feeling a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit out of your depth. And that's when you're going somewhere exciting. And that's where he wanted to be when he was talking about creativity. So maybe we are constantly creating or recreating ourselves as we heal. So what does this all have to do with healing? Because that's what I'm supposed to be talking about. So healing is a very broad concept. It's associated with the spiritual, but it's also associated with how we live as humans. And the biomedical battle idea of a journey might just be one aspect of it. So I think as a group, we're interested in the broader picture, in how we become whole and what we need in order to do this. What are the conditions for transformation? And I'm particularly interested in all the unifying threads that run underneath this and the common themes. So that's really me. So I'm going to stop sharing now. There we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Sure.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, everybody. Over to you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I can read. There is one message. I think it's probably somebody just saying that they're leaving the meeting. I don't know. I can't read. So, Catherine, are you? If you're there and want to ask the question, please do. If not, I will read it out loud. Okay. So I will read it. Whilst I agree that significant problems exist in the training of medicine. So okay. So while I agree that significant whilst I agree that significant problems exist, I can no more, yeah. In the training of medicine, medical profession, I have to leave. Okay, she's just leaving. Okay. The meeting, as I find the narrative to be sweeping and overgeneralized here. As an artist academic who works in art and health research, I feel it is rude to describe people who don't agree with you as stupid or unable to cope conceptually. I have been fortunate enough to have worked with some extremely open-minded clinicians, and I therefore feel some sadness that the first two speakers have been unfortunate enough to have not encountered such individuals. Perhaps there is a reason why. Despite the unknown, Natalie, restoring some faith, I have still decided to leave. My apology. Okay, so I guess you're probably not unfamiliar with this type of responses.
Well, I mean, I think it's very fair, to be honest. I think, you know, I'm often guilty of overstating my case to try and make an impact against what I see as the mainstream, which is aggressively against me. So I accept that criticism. I don't And of course, I accept also that there are lots of good things that go on in medicine. I'd like to think that some of the things I did in medicine were not too bad, who knows, but it's not without major problems as well.
Yeah. I think I can see Katrina has the hand up. And then if you're here also, please do raise your hand as well.
Oh, well, thank you, Paul, Aisha, and Natalie. That was really, really interesting and thought-provoking talk. I guess, and maybe this is more of a methodology question because I can't help myself return to methods at some point. But just thinking about the research on healing, and how do you begin to unpack, or maybe you don't, what's the therapeutic relationships, what are the sort of qualities and relational aspects that healers possess in their work, and the actual act of healing, or are they intertwined and not? Can healers heal themselves was a question I was asking myself as I was listening to you talk.
Right, I'll have first go at that. I'm sure Aisha and Natalie may want to say something. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, Katrina, and trying to gain understanding. So methodologically, well, I've observed, I've subjected myself to the ministrations of healers, I've talked to them about what's going on. And of course, I've practiced medicine a lot for most of my career, which is not without its healing element. And I think methodologically, well, I'm not a methodologist, but there's a variety of these qualitative techniques which I think help us to gain some understanding. But I think I would echo in my answer what Aisha emphasized, which is a connection. And I think the essence of the centrality of a healing encounter or a healing moment is one of those magical brief moments in time when you are fully connected with another person and there is nothing else. And one of my colleagues describes it as the moment when the room disappears. When you're with somebody and suddenly you are as one person. And quite a lot of the healers I've talked to have described this moment very beautifully, saying that sometimes it's so intense that they don't really know what part of the reality they're in is them and what part of the reality is the other person. But they often don't like talking about it too much because they say that they think they'll be carted off and put in a straitjacket if they admit to these kind of very strange ways of connecting with people. So I think it is about this mystical moment of connection. And I think you methodologically get that insight by listening to people or experiencing it yourself. And I have experienced it. Aisha, what do you think?
Yeah, just to sort of add to that, and also to say, you know, with regards to the first question as well, which I'm not sure I managed to hear all of it properly, but I think that, you know, obviously this is a very summarized short talk, and we're sort of separating out the biomedical professionals from these other sort of healers. But obviously we're aware of the fact that, first of all, there's a real sort of scale there, and different professionals have completely different experiences and different takes on things, and might well be, you know, artists as well as clinicians and so on. But also, if we just look at sort of health professionals, you have people working in palliative care, you have psychotherapists, you have nurses, you have all kinds of groups which actually do involve these aspects of healing, the sort of the personal relationship, the connection, all of these things, and that's all there. And we're not dismissing that, and we're not unfortunate enough to not have never met any of these people. We've worked with them a lot over many, many years, and we're trying to bring together. We're not trying to kind of, you know, other and dismiss everyone. We're trying to actually do the opposite. So I think I just want to make that clear, really.
It's very helpful.
Sure.
I know there are some questions in the Zoom, but just to be a bit kind of giving a chance to the room here as well. Is there any question here? Okay, so
I do have a question.
Okay, good.
Well, yeah, it's interesting to notice how even for me as a sociologist of medicine is kind of surprising to hear a talk and a project such as this, because we get used to kind of avoiding certain concepts or avoiding certain realms or certain possibilities. I was wondering, thinking about placebos, to what extent in medicine already works in a healing way, in the sense that maybe the ceremonial aspect of Western medicine already has a power, or already is able to change things beyond what the doctors believe or beyond their view of healing. So if you have any thought on that dimension, symbolic or ceremonial of medicine itself.
Well, I absolutely agree. And there was a lovely paper written about placebo a few years ago by a professor in Harvard who's one of the sort of kingpins of placebo research, and who compared the rituals of shamanic healing, the rituals of homeopathy, and the rituals of a classical Western biomedical encounter, and posited exactly your concept that it was the rituals that were all important, and that they were the powerful mediator of what we call the placebo response. And I think that's right. I mean, I think the other element of the placebo response is that when we use placebos, it's generally in a blinded situation, so we don't know that they're placebos. So they're given with hope and expectation that they will work. And I think that's perhaps akin to the cress experiment. You know, if you hope the cress will grow better, it does. If you hope the patient will get better, they do. And this kind of relatively strange, subtle effect of a prescriber, a doctor, any kind of person trying to help another is, I think, an important facet within the panoply of what we're calling healing. And, you know, I sometimes call it the Bridget Jones effect. Bridget had a mad friend who was always in tears and interrupting her life, and they'd have a chat together for a while, and then Bridget would be in tears, but the friend would be much better. So these interchanges where we try to help each other are very powerful. So I think those are all elements of what's going on here. The placebo effect is, I think, an extremely unfortunate term, actually. But, you know, some people call it context effects. There are various other terminologies used. Meaning effects is a popular one, that it's about making new meaning. So it's a multi-layered thing. That's a big part of healing, so thank you.
Sorry, and now I need to go to, because there are 3 questions from the Zoom. Yeah. So the first one was Martin Moore. Are you there, Martin?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here. Hey, yeah. I was just wondering whether the speakers might reflect a bit more. I'm just thinking about that the first question that came in, and I suppose the risks of the dichotomy, the sort of risks of falling into the kind of if you want to call it very crudely, all healing is good, biomedicine is kind of bad in a way. Or I know that's not what you're trying to articulate, but I suppose what I'm quite interested in is how you negotiate that when you're, as Paul said, you're often presumably moving in circles when you're giving these papers that might be quite hostile. And so obviously, that the message that you're sort of sharing is not always going to be kind of welcomed. So I guess I was just sort of wondering about that kind of from both a sort of strategic point of view, but also from a personal point of view about how it kind of feels in a way of having to negotiate that and what the strategies you have for using them.
Well, I'll start again if my colleagues don't mind. So thank you. I mean, I think clearly I didn't negotiate that very well today. And I apologize for that. So it is difficult. I find it very difficult. I do feel, I often feel rather isolated, and I feel I've been thrown out of the club, really. So I'm not a part of anything, any professional body anymore, because I've pinned my colours to the mast of something that's much more metaphysical, spiritual, but inclusive, which, I certainly don't want to diss medicine. I spent most of my life practicing it. I think it's wonderful. But it ignores the spiritual side, and it ignores other components of life. And yeah, to say that without dichotomizing, without causing ruptions is very difficult. And I don't actually have an answer to you. I don't know how to do that. And I guess we as a group need to figure that out.
Yeah, Natalie, do you have something that follows from that?
Yeah, it does.
But I just need, very brief, there is other people as well.
It's actually following on from Paul's answer. Being a scientist myself and having become a homeopath, it's something I've had to negotiate. And I think for me, what it is it's about the dominance of the biomedical model. And the biomedical model is just one within many. And this also speaks to a kind of post-colonial world as well, where we're looking at a more diverse sort of offering. I come from South Africa, so I've got an interest in all of this. So I think it's a question of what's appropriate, and a question of having a bit more of a choice, and challenging the dominance of the biomedical model. I'm not entirely convinced it works so well anymore. So I think that's where I'm coming from. Yeah. Thank you.
Sarah Dean.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, great talks. Thank you very much. And Paul, I think your strident approach is, sometimes it's warranted, because actually there is this collective arrogance in our medical professions. You win some, you lose some, don't you? I'm a physio by background, but I'm also a psychologist, for those who don't know me. And, I had that healing hands moment with patients that made me realize that there was some magic ingredient going on that I had sometimes and didn't seem to have at other times. And what was it? Or was it the patient? Or was it, what was it? And that's what led me to become a health researcher. And here I am years later, still trying to find out what it is that helps patients to adhere to their treatment. Because like the placebo effect, there is a healthy adherer effect, and there's literature on that. And it's it is a powerful effect. And so I'm always try and work out ways of how to help people to adhere either to the treatment, the belief they have in the treatment that the health provider's giving them, or their own ability to self-heal. And I just think with the placebo message, it's about making use of it, giving people permission to make use of it. As long as they're not doing any harm, it's such a powerful thing. So I'm just here to say, yeah, really supportive of all you're doing. And I'd just be so fascinated to join and contribute in any way, because I just think it's really, really important.
Sarah, thank you so much. Lovely to see you again. And thank you for those very supportive comments. It's interesting, isn't it, that, you know, in different aspects of healthcare, or indeed on the sofa with a friend over a cup of coffee, one can have these moments of contact and moments of magic and meaning. And that's what that's why I'm here too. Thank you.
So, okay. I think I'm trying to follow like a chronological approach. So I think there was a question from you here.
Yes.
Still have it?
Well, I just wanted to thank you so much. It's very interesting, and I just wanted to comment on a bit from my culturally different perspective, because I come from the southern part of Russia, which is kind of very diverse, because there's three different regions across the Buddhist region, Muslim, and Christian, so Orthodox, and I kind of grew up around all of this mix of different people and mentalities, let's say. And when I came here, I felt a really strong contrast, especially when I came to see GP. First, this is completely different experience from what I had when I grew up in the South, but I'm not comparing it to Moscow, that it's different. But in the South, it's more, well, it's not, medicine is not great as in the highest levels of what accepted from a Western perspective, obviously. But to see a doctor, that would be more of a therapeutic experience. And a doctor becomes, like a GP becomes a friend of the family even. And my mom's got a heart condition, like a long standing. And we've got a doctor who's basically our friend. They become our friends, and they're friends of they're community based. And it helps as much as probably the medication that they constantly prescribe, which is another thing. But so I noticed how lines are the line is blurry really there, and it's getting less so because Moscow and the influence of the Western and capitalist society having an impact on the South as well. So it's all kind of dying out, and there's lots of magic as well, like shamans, and especially in the Buddhist area. But it's all kind of slowly dying out as well. And I just wanted to kind of mention the difference I've experienced, and also made me think a bit of when you were talking about your experiences, it made me think of Sheldrake's morphic resonance and how he got excluded from the community. And it's just, cruel and unreasonable. That's it.
Thank you. I'd love to talk to you about Rupert Sheldrake, but I suspect that's slightly off slightly off topic. But yeah, I mean, he's negotiated his extradition from the scientific community with huge equanimity and grace, and I'm a huge admirer of him. I think the point I'd just like to make in response to your issue is that culture and context are massively important here. If you look at studies of healing in general, if you look for serious studies of healing, they're largely done by anthropologists. And an awful lot of them are about an anthropologist from the well-off Western world going to somewhere in the developing world and sort of saying, whoa, these strange people do strange things. And I've deliberately tried to avoid that trap, because I think you can only understand things within your own culture. You know, I've lived in this country all my life. I think I understand some of the culture and the medical culture. And so I come from there, I study it within that context. And I think that's, dare I say it, a much more valid approach to trying to understand healing. And as to the friendly family doctor, well, that's a thing of the past in this country, sadly, and I think we miss it. And I think our health is worse because of not having it.
Okay, I think I have to speak, unless does it follow closely from that? So I saw Rebecca, is it Rebecca Bista? Is that the same question you had before, then you put your hand back again? Or is it a different question? I'm joking, go ahead.
I think my cat may have trodden on my computer.
Yeah, I know, I was just joking. I saw you raise your hand and you put it back, so yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I was really interested in your talk, and I'd like to kind of explore the idea of the connection between people a little bit more, if that's possible. I work on medically unexplained illnesses that involve medically unexplained symptoms, particularly ME, CFS. And one of the things that so many patients who have ME say about their encounters with, particularly with biomedical establishment, but also in fact that they often have to turn to other kinds of healing, is that they are disbelieved in what they're saying about their illness. And I was wondering whether you had sort of looked further into this sense of connection to see what part belief and disbelief plays in that, and sort of the level of understanding. I know from personal experience, for example, that my unwellness is seen by my yoga teacher in a way that no biomedical profession has ever been able to see it. And I think that that's something that builds trust, and it creates a sort of an exchange of belief in which you can then establish a much more healing relationship. So, and the other side of that, I think, is fear. And I think the fear part of not being believed and of being within this very sort of mechanical context of the biomedical encounter is that fear is actually very damaging, and it perpetuates illness rather than the other way around. And I wondered how much you thought about those things in the sort of work that you've been doing.
Thank you so much. Big questions. I'm going to be very brief and suggest that Aisha and Natalie may want to say something. Fear and disbelief, yes. I mean, the negative side of the placebo effect is the nocebo effect. It's extremely powerful. We estimate that it's 5 times more powerful than the placebo effect. So disbelieving someone, dissing them, giving them the feeling that you don't understand them is incredibly damaging. And that's a huge subject and a very important one, I think. I just want to make one other brief comment, which is I think that the plight of people with conditions, so-called medically unexplained conditions, and that in itself is a wonderful expression, isn't it? That tells us so much about the way we think about the world. I think their plight might be improved by long COVID, because long COVID seems to replicate a lot of those strange conditions that we as doctors don't understand and can't treat. Natalie, Aisha, do you have any comments on the connection? Was the big question, and I've ducked that.
Just yeah, thank you so much for for your comment and question. But yeah, I mean, I also was picking up on the unexplained part of that, and unexplained by who and within what model. And we're definitely interested in that. And about connection, I mean, just kind of bringing together mind and body and looking at this notion of wholeness and holistic healthcare is central to what we're looking at. So be it sort of fear or stress or whatever, it's absolutely all valid and all has effects. And so yeah, thank you, and we'd love to speak more to you.
Chris Dickens and then Karen Mantik. Chris?
Paul, it's very good to see you again after a long time, and thank you very much for your presentation. And I really enjoy your strident approach, because I think, as Sarah said, it's the monumental arrogance of the medical establishment that you need to raise your voice against the establishment. So yeah, congratulations, and I enjoyed it. I've got a kind of shower of random thoughts, some of which have been sort of picked up already. And to what extent is this a problem for Western medicine as opposed to medicine elsewhere? In that, we always blame Descartes for this, and poor old Descartes. If we were having this discussion in China or elsewhere in the world, would we have less problem with a kind of categorization of medicine? So that's the first thing I want to throw in. The other thing is about, what is healing? Well, I just wonder whether healing is an entirely personal experience, and that trying to find a definition for it is going to be bewildering, because each of us might have a different idea of what wholeness and completeness is. Some of that might have to do with health, but it is likely that health is only a part of that. And it can be nothing to do with health. I mean, Paul, you will, and I have certainly seen people who are approaching death who suddenly become sort of calm, and makes you wonder, that's where the kind of the health parameters are going in one direction, and yet people appear to be becoming more healed, and you see family sort of rifts being sort of overcome, and personal problems melting into insignificance. So it can be the opposite of health. And I wanted just to throw in, and I really hope this doesn't cause any offense to anybody. I'm going to be a bit contentious now. I wasn't prepared to write it down in case it comes back to haunt me, but I want to raise the issue of psychological therapies. So psychological therapies are a part of the establishment. There, you can go to your GP and you can get signed up for psychological therapies, and there are hundreds of trials that show that psychological therapies are effective, providing you compare them with absolutely nothing. And as soon as you compare them with anything, another human being sitting in the room and having a chat with you, psychological therapies don't have any demonstrable effect above that. So it's something to do with the sharing of space with another human being that seems to be the vital component. Maybe people have even done the math on this, and they go, well, what bit is added by the CBT bit of the therapy above what you just have from a chat? And it's estimated that about 80% of the effect comes from non-specific elements, and about 15% of it comes from the cognitive aspects of it. So there's a paradigm, and of course the sort of psychologists have managed to become part of the medical establishment. But this is anyway, I'm gonna stop talking now, but just very interesting. I've really enjoyed it.
Chris, great to see you. Thank you so much. I'm going to give one-word answers to two of your points, or possibly three, and completely ignore the other one. What is healing? I completely agree. A single definition is not possible or sensible because it's experiential and it's context dependent. So I agree with you entirely about that. The point about death is something that intrigues me greatly. I was very interested in the fact, I've been interviewing some other doctors who are interested in healing, and several of them have brought my attention to the concept of dying healed. And that's quite subversive for medicine, but I think a really interesting subject to study. I don't think I can remember your other points, so I'll see whether Aisha or Natalie want to say anything. But Chris, we need to have a discussion, clearly.
At a pub, I should think.
In a pub would be excellent.
Thank you.
So do Aisha or Natalie want to add anything to that?
Maybe just about, yeah, thank you, Chris, but your point about psychological therapies, and I think that's a whole area which we definitely want to look into more. And some of these aspects, I mean, what are the aspects within psychotherapy, psychological therapies, talking therapies, that are contributing to healing? What can we learn from that? What can we bring together? What are the changes taking place in kind of things like CBT or elsewhere? What's being lost there? And, you know, can that be replaced by a robot? You know, kind of what's going on there? But certainly we want to, again, just kind of gather together in a positive way, gather together what is going on, and as Paul said, kind of healing while dying, palliative care, all of that is just incredibly important to this work, and is, like psychological therapy, is part of the mainstream as well. So thank you for bringing up both those points.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I always find that whole CBT thing so interesting, because it's a kind of like a directive that comes down from the top, where you have to become a certain way. And I always think to myself, who actually decides what way you're going to become, or what way you've got to aim for? That's the goal. You've got to be this normalized person, whatever it is. And who makes those decisions? So it's quite a strange way of doing it, rather than it coming from the bottom up, where where it kind of bubbles up. You deal with the pain underneath, which is what psychotherapy does, and then what actually happens. And you become who you become, whatever that is. So this whole idea of known and unknown, and defined and purpose, and then it comes back to fear, what I was talking about. So that kind of dichotomy really interests me, as to how we slot therapies into those different pathways of the known and the unknown, or the goal and the maybe, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, I'll leave it up to God, something like that. I find that very interesting.
I mean, if you don't fit and you don't respond, you know, you become a non-responder. So you as the patient get the blame for that. And, It's not just that the therapy is too restricted or whatever. You know, you're a failure, a treatment failure. So
exactly.
You know. Yeah.
And it's also very culturally defined as well, isn't it? You know, this kind of, you know, idea of, you know, being normal and fitting into society. And maybe I've been reading a bit too much R.D. Laing. But
well, I would just like to say that I'm a psychiatrist, and I suffer from all those. I'm not just picking on my colleagues who are psychologists, but you know, psychiatric treatments are no better.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Karen?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the talks too, and I think setting healing up in opposition to biomedicine is interesting. So it has fueled the discussion, but it's interesting for me. It almost worked in the opposite way, in making me think, well, aren't they quite similar, or couldn't they be quite similar? And I think it was particularly that phrase about focused attention with positive intention, that you think, surely that's what medicine and healthcare is about. I guess I'm saying this from the perspective of someone who works in medical education, which is kind of a trials-free zone, and where qualitative and quantitative methodologies of all sorts kind of are in a bit of a melting pot. And also the clinicians working in the medical education space, I think, are quite self-selecting in many ways. I think often they have an interest in the arts, in the relational, and I just wonder if there are some clinicians, not necessarily just medics, who would really recognise the description of healing and say, actually, that is what I do. So methodologically, I just wonder if it would be very interesting to find some people, whether healers or clinicians, who are working in that space, who really recognise the other and try and understand from them what they see as the same and different. I wonder what they would say.
Thank you, Karen. So I've interviewed some of them, sought them out and interviewed them. There is a problem of putting your head above the parapet, which we've already discussed. And some of the interviews I've had, I've not been able to use because the informant didn't want me to. And, you know, even trying to be as careful with anonymity as possible. But you're right, and you know, I've had healing encounters as a clinician working as a doctor before I was interested in healing, in retrospect, and it's there and it's part of it. And I wanted to say something else very important, which I might have lost. How did you start your question?
Well, I was thinking about the focused attention.
Yes, thank you. Yes, well, that's right. So I want to tell you a very brief story. Can I tell a very brief story? Yes. Medical education. So you've met Sarah Goldingay, probably.
Yeah.
Yes. So she and I decided we should think about how to teach about clinical encounters for you. And she said to me, why don't you come to the drama department with me and Mick Mangan, who was one of the professors then at the time, it's just up the road here. And we'll do a little workshop to think about how we might model clinical encounter teaching. So I rolled up at the appointed time of 9 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, you know, and I sort of went into the big room they had, and then I got my laptop out and started checking my emails and looking at my phone and all those things that you do. And they started striding around the room and going into strange poses and doing a lot of deep breathing. And all this sort of stuff went on for a while. And I was thinking, for goodness sake, you're wasting time, get up and write a paper or something. And after a while, they stopped and I said, well, what have you been doing? They said, well, we're just preparing ourselves. What do you do before you see a patient? Now, that was a pivotal moment for me as a clinician, because normally what I was doing before I saw a patient was rushing through the end of my sandwich and making a telephone call at the same time. I did not prepare myself for the encounter. And one of the questions I think mentioned, perhaps it was Sarah, mentioned the importance of preparing yourself and being in a position where you can have an encounter that revolves around focused attention with good intention. And if you do, healing can happen, I think, whatever healing is. So let's teach that, let's work with that.
But don't you think there's clinicians working in a way that they have to, and then clinicians working in the way that they would like to? And I'm thinking about people like Martina Kelly's, I don't know if you saw Martina Kelly present about touch in the clinical encounter. She's in medical education. I'll maybe send you her work because I think it'll be really interesting and relevant.
Yeah, touch I think is important, but so much of this is about role models, though, isn't it, as well? And I'm not sure we get the right role models. That's another big topic. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, I think most of the questions in the chat have been either answered by the general questions or by people in the chat. But there is something that Saradin just wrote. So is there something here about shame as well, as fear of being outed? The shame of admitting that medicine might be just about doing healing, which I think is kind of linked to what Chris was also asking earlier about psychotherapy and psychiatry.
Yeah, I think it's about certainly fear, and I mean, okay, I default to stories. So I have a bad knee, which is a bit of a Strange thing for an arthritis doctor to admit. No idea what to do about it. And it was really bad a few years ago, and I went to one of my colleagues. He said, "Oh, you need that replacing. Goodness me, that's bad." This is a terrible thing to admit. Let's not record this. He said, "I could do it for you next week if you like." Well, he was the professor of orthopedics elsewhere, I might say, and I was the professor of something else, and he was prepared to do it for me next week. That's terrible. But putting that aside, I thought, I don't know about this really, and I said, well, maybe not next week, and I went on my way, and I went to see a healer, to interview a healer, and this healer said, well, you can only understand healing if you experience it. Have you got anything that needs healing? And I said, I've got this bad knee. And so anyway, the healer worked on the bad knee, and it was very strange, and the knee got a lot better. And I've got a daughter who's a doctor, and I'd been to see her a few weeks before, and I hadn't been able to get up the stairs in her house because of my knee. Went to see her again a few weeks later, and I was bounding up and down the stairs and things. She didn't notice to begin with. But then she said, let's go to the pub. We straight off to go to the pub. And she suddenly looked around and she said to me, you're walking properly again. You went and had your knee replaced without telling me, didn't you? I said, no. And I tried to keep a straight face. I said I had it healed. And she looked at me, and I could see the look that said, my father has gone completely bonkers. And then she stopped herself and she said, have you had it x-rayed to see if the x-rays got better? I said, no, I'm not really interested in the x-ray, but interested in the symptoms, and they've gone away. And she said, if you have an x-ray and it shows it's got better, we're all finished as doctors, aren't we? And there was fear in her voice. So the fear of being found out as not having the answers, or maybe joint replacement not being the right thing to do, I think it's a big part of who we are as doctors. Again, it's back to medical education. We are brainwashed into thinking we have answers to things. We do not. We have answers to some things, sometimes. So I think the fear of the whole thing being built on sand is in the subconscious of lots of doctors. Sarah.
No, I get that, but I also think admitting that you haven't got the answers, is shame, is embarrassing, yes, or undermines who you are.
Yes,
and that's where the sense of sort of you have to swallow a lot of pride.
Yes,
to say actually medicine doesn't have all the answers, or it was really interesting. I had a dinner with some friends, and I was talking about the fact that I teach about evidence-based medicine, and he said, well, isn't all medicine evidence-based? And this is so that all of that we're criticizing the medicine colleagues about, the public perception is there. It's so predominant that medicine will answer all our questions, and I think that's working how we convey these messages that you're talking about today to the general public, to perhaps lower their expectations of medicine, would actually be quite a good idea.
Absolutely. So say all of us, Sarah. Thank you. I don't know how we do that. I think it's getting worse. I mean, I think COVID again is making that worse, really, because, oh yeah, well, medical science dealt with that then, so it can deal with anything.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for this talk. I was prompted to think about lots of things, really. So I'll just stick to the one thing. In Italy, there's an association of medics. It's the Catholic Association of Medical Professionals. And I always found this to be really interesting, because why would they feel the need to create an association of Catholic medical professionals? And it's actually really interesting in Italy specifically, because there is a history of considering a person healthy when their soul is healthy. So there is this spiritual element that sort of in that association of professionals is there very much present. And it might be a good idea, I don't know, maybe for your research, to interview some of them and about the healing, rather than the healing as is perceived by people to be, I don't know, Reiki, shamanism and things like that, but healing as the healing encounter, which has the spiritual element in it, and how that is incorporated in their practice as Catholic medical professionals.
Thank you so much. Absolutely, that's a really good point. I think one thing we sort of touched on tangentially, but not said out loud, I think, is that one of the issues, at least for me, is that doctors and medicine and medical education never talks about the soul. It talks about the body and mind, and it's still a bit confused about Descartes. Somebody mentioned Descartes. It's still a bit confused about whether dualism is there or isn't it, and I can't quite cope with that. But the soul never, which, is weird, isn't it? I think. But there's one other, and obviously I need to come to Italy because there's another movement in Italy that you may know about that's really magic, I think. And that's what's called slow medicine.
Oh, yes, yes.
Which developed in Italy. Mm. And I'd love to know more about slow medicine. Slow medicine, well, you could probably say more informed about it than I am, but it sort of came out of the slow food business, but it's not about being slow, it's just about being thoughtful within the natural environment and letting nature be a part of getting better and of healing. And, maybe we can build on what Italy's teaching.
Yes, because healing is a big part of that medical encounter.
That is absolutely right.
Healing in the sense that
that's what I
the spiritual element is there.
That's what I understand, but I've only read about it. I haven't been able to witness it at all. I'd love to do that. Can't speak Italian though.
I can. Oh. Yes, I'm Italian. Yeah.
We'll have a date.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
And there are healing foods as well. If you look at some of the, very much so historically, and still currently used.
Hildegard of Bingen knew that, and in a sense could be thought of as the first slow medicine doctor.
Could I just come back to Chris Dickens' point about the talking therapies, in that the sitting in the room talking to someone, but there's also the James Pennebaker stuff around expressive emotional writing, and the health benefits of doing that. And it struck me that, is it the processing of your experiences out, first of all, emotions and physical experiences that have no words, and then your brain converts it into words, and then you share those words with another person, either in the written form or in the verbal talking therapy form. So it's not what you're saying, it's just the fact that you're talking, you're processing stuff. Is that the healing element of the cognitive behavioral talking therapies? And so therefore it's very non-specific and not easily measured, I guess. But it struck me that maybe that is what's happening. And so that sitting in a room with somebody else, that social interaction, that verbal or written or visual communication is us processing and therefore getting the healing benefits.
Yeah, so I think you need to join Chris and I in the pub, Sarah, probably. Yes, I mean, I think Chris made the point when he was talking about it's just being with another human being, but it's the quality of that being with another person, I think. And I don't know that we understand enough about the quality of that thing. Maybe that's a brilliant topic in itself, I think, actually.
Yeah, and we've been charged in medical education to help our medical students talk to women, which is a really fascinating sort of government directive. But it does strike me that there's, you know, that sitting in a room and being with another person and being able to communicate with them is critical.
Yeah.
And
I'm not
so
sure how
much to learn.
I'm not sure how much communication goes on in CBT where they say, I don't care what's happened to you in the past, I only care what's here and now. But I thought what was interesting about the Pennebaker work is this is about narratives. And is there something here about, you know, our whole heal state being about being a complete narrative? We are very verbal kind of creatures, and you know, is it the thing about writing it down is it enables you to get down on paper your narrative and to go back and correct bits that you've missed and things like that. And you know, we know that the people, for example, who've experienced trauma have a lot of difficulty sort of remembering things in sequence and in proportion, because they have difficulty just with anxiety. It interferes with this process, and that by writing it down, it gives us chance to go back and edit it. And I do wonder whether something about healing is to do with our own personal narratives and making them complete. So when somebody writes the book of Paul Dieppe or Chris Dickens, it will, you know, there'll be a full stop at the end, and it'll be complete. There won't be any volume 2.
Yeah, although the Pennebaker work is also about repeated writing of the same thing, and you change, you know, you move away from the event, you go from writing it in the first person, I and this happened to me, to when this happened and we did this, and you can actually track the change in the way that people write about the event. So it's very fascinating.
We did a study with the Pennebaker technique many years ago and managed to make people worse with it, which was quite an achievement. That's another story. I'm not going to tell that story, but it's about stories. I think stories is the issue. It's about, we live in our stories, we are our stories, and we often live in the wrong story. And I think a facet of healing is changing the story you live in from the wrong story to the right story. And I think Pennebaker type techniques are potentially a powerful way of doing that. So that's my very amateur take on Pennebaker.
So being true to yourself.
Yes, if you like. But also the story does change when you tell it, though. When you tell the story, it changes the story. And it can be a better story.
Yeah, but Paul, there's a lot of philosophical work that's actually been done about pinning something down and trying to describe it. And once you try to describe it, you destroy it. So it's interesting that you write again and again and again, because then you maybe get different aspects of it and you don't destroy it. It's a way of actually keeping it alive. Yeah, that's very interesting. Which is actually one of the problems with our kind of scientific objectifying kind of way of apprehending the world, is that, you know, once we pin it down, it's gone. It's not there anymore.
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting because in many ways we can be very let down by the language that we use, and yet we are symbol-making, meaning-making beings. And anthropology has done a lot of work, as has philosophy, in looking at that aspect of what is it to be well, what is it to be ill. And like Leder's The Absent Body, this idea that actually the body being absent to our awareness is when we actually become well. It's no longer an object acting against the self.
Who wrote that? Did you say a name there? Was it Leder?
Leder, The Absent Body.
Thank you. I'll have a look at that.
I have this very nasty role of saying that the time has come. So I think because people are already starting to leave, there are a lot of messages in the chat of people expressing interest in keeping the conversation, being part of the discussion. So I would invite maybe to share the chat with at least like Paul, Aisha, and Natalie. And because it's 3:30 in the end, right? Yeah, so I think we're a bit beyond that. So I just wanted to thank Paul, Aisha, and Natalie, and everybody here and on Zoom. Very, very interesting, lively discussion. And Thanks. I don't know how to end this.
Thank you so much.
The recording will be stopped. That's the way it will end, with a voice.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.